Hello, peeps. It's the Hillbilly Halfwit, and how are you today? Today we're going to do a bit of a different video. I was watching something the other day, and it's a long interview, and I just got a little short bit out of it for you, of the nephew of Kennedy, and he was being interviewed by Jordan Peterson. Now, I'd suggest you go and have a look at that interview because there's a lot of really amazing world stuff and history coming out of that interview. The guy now, the nephew, is the running mate for Trump. And so if Trump gets in, he's going to be the vice president. And I had to look through his history throughout his life. He's not been perfect. He was on drugs and stuff when he's in school, like a rich kid in America and things. But after he went through that, remember his dad was actually killed. So Kennedy was killed, assassinated. Then his dad tried to be the president afterwards, and he was assassinated. So remember, this lad has had hardish early part to his life. So when he went to college, then he's dabbled with drugs and gone off the rails and things. But then he became an environmental lawyer. So he started fighting back against a lot of corruption by the water companies in America, and also with vaccines and things like that. He's a very clever guy. But anyway, what I liked about this little short clip was he shows and talks about the history of why his uncle was probably assassinated. So I think this is worth a listen for everybody, because you will see how the world works, and how it worked back then, and how it'll work always. It's quite what's calling when you hear about it. But remember, the guy's got a bad throat because he's got a throat condition, but that doesn't make you a bad person. I think he could be a good second in command because he's an anti-war person. And there we are. You have a listen. Say what you think. So the content in this video is intended for comedic purposes only. The views expressed in this video are not to be taken as factual information or representation of my personal beliefs. I am critically reviewing the info and videos I show as examples. Now, in this next clip I'm going to show you, he's preceded this by saying his uncle was being tried to be pushed into wars by the CIA and various other organizations, and he said no 4 times. So then they tried to get him into the Vietnam War, and he talks about this, okay?
To project economic power rather than military power abroad. My uncle was under tremendous pressure to go to war in Laos, which he resisted in 1961, to go to war in Germany during the Checkpoint Charlie crisis in 62, to go to war against Cuba in 61 during the Bay of Pigs, and then again in 63 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then to go to Vietnam. Virtually all of his advisors were telling him he had to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government was collapsed, and he said, it's their government. We cannot fight their war for them. He ultimately, under great pressure, sent 16,000 military advisors, and then who were not, under his rules of engagement, allowed to participate in combat. Some of them did. In October of 1963, he learned that a Green Beret had been killed in Vietnam. And he turned to his aide, Walt Rostow, and he said, I want the casualties, a complete list of casualties, of U.S. casualties. Rostow came back to him an hour later and there were 76 Americans that died at that point. My uncle said it's too many. And that afternoon, this October 22nd, 1963, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all military personnel, U.S. military personnel, out of Vietnam. By 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home by December. So that would have been 6 weeks later. And then he was killed 30 days to the date after he signed that order. And a week after that, President Johnson, his successor, remanded National Security Order 263. Johnson then sent 265,000 Americans to Vietnam. It became our war. My father ran against that war in 1968, and he also was killed in that process. And then Nixon took over and sent 560,000 Americans to Vietnam. We killed 1 million of them, maybe 2 million. They killed 56,000 of our children, including my cousin George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive.
Well, there you are, isn't it? God, I don't know why that sort of got me a bit emotional when you hear it like that. All them people died because one person was removed. What can you say? Kennedy, who was assassinated, has definitely had his problems, where he was a serious womanizer and he had a severe back problem when he was on amphetamines all the time. But I think he was a decent leader. If he'd have still been there, none of this would have happened. And it does really show how the world works. And now we're in a lot of war situations all over the world. And I think it's very close to what this guy is explaining. Again. Now, of course, you have to go to war sometimes, but I don't know. I wasn't expecting that to make me quite emotional, I got to say, after hearing that. Since I've been born, I've heard that story of the assassination, and you always hear different theories about it all. But when you hear it from the nephew of the guy that got killed and his father got killed, that's what happened, really. We know what happened. So I thought that was just a video people needed to see. And if you want to go and see it, go to Jordan Peterson's page and have a look at the whole interview, because the guy is a fountain of knowledge, absolute fountain of knowledge. And I think if Trump does get in with him, there's going to be a much different thing happening in America. So perhaps some don't like it, but this guy is anti-war for a start, and that's a good thing. So please comment, rate, subscribe, and like I say, I just do stories from you. You don't know what the story's going to be from one day to the next. So ta-da.